This is Spyderco Pingo. Interesting little knife. I recently noticed for the first time it actually has a little sharpening choil or notch at the base of the blade. Kind of curious how they actually put that in. I didn't notice it when I first got it, and didn't notice it while I was using it, and even sharpened it a couple of times. It looks like it was actually formed during the actual grinding of the edge by the belt, because the actual edge bevel dips down up into the primary grind. I'm not sure if that was accidental or intentional, but kind of curious. I just want to use this, talk a little bit about sharpening. I'm going to demonstrate sharpness off a particular stone in a minute. I think one of the ideas and one of the most important aspects of sharpening is to realize that there are multiple bevels on the knife, and that in general you need to work all the bevels. Murray Carter talks about this an awful lot for long-term maintenance. But even for short-term maintenance you often have to use or maintain multiple bevels. But your approach to those bevels differs because the bevels are doing different things. And that means not only how you sharpen in terms of technique, forces and that kind of stuff, but also the stones that you apply change significantly depending on what bevel you're working on. So this knife has three bevels. It has the main blade bevel, it has the edge bevel, and then it has the apex bevel. The apex bevel is a micro bevel. You can't actually see it. And it's the one that actually determines the sharpness. The other bevels just determine the cutting ability. The main blade bevel, almost very few people, almost nobody maintains. The only reason you need to do any work on the blade bevel is because when you grind the edge bevel, it gets thicker every time. And at some point, it will affect the cutting ability and ease of sharpening. But very few people use their knives that extensively. Murray Carter talks about it a lot and maintains that you should always work the blade bevel. But again, you have to use your knives an awful lot for that to become a factor. If you are grinding down the main bevel, you need to use an ultra aggressive stone, like a 100 grit stone, and you need to put a lot of force to get stones to cut because the contact area is so wide, the pressure becomes very low. For the edge bevel, the ideal stones that I've found to set the edge bevel are muddy. And that was found sort of by accident, but it's very easy to understand why. What's the main problem that people have in sharpening, or one of them? They grind down the edge, it forms a burr, and they never get it really sharp after that. It kind of slices paper okay, maybe it'll scrape arm hair a little bit, but they never achieve that high sharpness that they see on videos. And the big problem that they often have is fooling around trying to get rid of that burr. Now if you think about it, it makes no sense to create a burr. What a burr is steel that's overground to the point that it's fatigued and collapsed and started to break off because it can no longer stay on the knife. That doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about why would you do that. The reason why burrs happen in general is because when people sharpen, they put so much force into the knife that it raises the pressure to such a high extent that it's damaging the steel by bending it as it is actually cutting it. One of the nice things about weaker stones that produce a slurry is that as you're grinding the edge, it's not only abrading the sides of the edge, it's actually abrading straight into the apex, and that keeps a burr from forming. They're great for working on the edge bevel. The same stones, however, are not very good for working on the apex bevel because that slurry again starts slamming into the apex, but you don't want it. At that point, you want a nice hard stone to just grind down the sides of the apex. And once you understand that on a basic level, a lot of the frustration will go out of sharpening, and then it becomes a point of experimenting with what techniques and grit finishes and stuff work for you. And I just want to demonstrate something. Now, I'm not going to claim this is the sharpest knife in existence, but I just want to show you a couple of examples of the sharpness that it has. This is just a piece of essentially newsprint. It won't push cut it, it'll come fairly close, but you need a bit of an angle to start. Right? So, and if you look at it, you can see that the fibers of the paper are a bit distorted. It works great on a slice, of course, and it will push cut on about a 45. And it'll also shave, but it's like really haggardy. So obviously it's taken off a lot of hair. Now, why is it so coarse? It was formed on this. This is a 36 grit. 36 grit. The stone is so coarse you can see the grit. This is a dressing stone. It's not even used to sharpen knives, or actually it's not supposed to be used to sharpen knives. How I sharpened it is, this is a horrible container for oil, by the way. I'm going to switch this out as soon as my detergent bottle gets empty. So you want to use oil because, again, you want to get the stone to cut. You don't want friction, you don't want rubbing. This is just a light mineral oil. And you only need enough oil on the top of the stone to basically form your layer. This stone is not tremendously porous. The oil won't actually go into it. And it's nicer if you actually use oil stones to have a little holder like this. It actually keeps the stone in it, so any excess oil goes down to the holder, doesn't go all over the place. I don't actually use this to sharpen that much, so I've just been playing around with it. If I did want to use it long term, I'd actually build a small holder. So you put the oil on it, and the oil does two things. Number one, it gets rid of the friction. You don't want friction. Friction is a waste. It's energy going into heat. You don't want that. What you want is cutting. You want all the energy going to cutting. Now, the other thing that it does is some stones like this, again, this is not a sharpening stone, it's a dressing stone, the grit can be rather irregular. And what the oil does, it will allow, if there is a bit of an irregular grit, it'll allow it to skip over. But, so, again, what I'm doing now is setting the apex, or the micro bevel. So this is how I put it on. Very light. Maybe 5 to 10 grams. As light as I can at this stage, just to get enough control. So the only force I'm applying is for control. Because again, I've already got the edge ground, and now I'm just applying the micro bevel. And what I want to do now is intentionally cross the scratch patterns to make sure I minimize any burr. Don't want to burr at this stage. So you can see I'm changing the angle of the knife on the stone. And the other thing you can do if you're really having a problem with the knife forming a burr, you can increase the angle dramatically, like around 45 degrees, take a couple passes and then back bevel it off. But I know the behavior of this knife, it's not going to form a significant burr. So again, this knife was already sharp, and that's how I already sharpened it in the beginning. Oil on a very coarse grit dressing stone. And now we clean it off. And the other point that I wanted to make, again, 36 grit dressing stone. I don't know that you could get a worse sharpening stone to use than that, because that's not even meant to be a sharpening abrasive. This knife, as you've seen, shaves, but is like a bit scratchy. Again, takes off lots of hair. Takes off skin with it. Again, that's a 36 grit edge. Easily slices newsprint like there's, slices it readily. And we'll almost do a push cut. So an actual push cut would be at a 90. It won't really do that. But if you tilt a little, so relatively close to a push cut, shaves, and again, it will take your hair off the same way because it's very aggressive, very jagged, serrated type edge. That's off a 36 grit stone. Now, one of the other points I wanted to make is, while I don't advocate in general you need a knife to be razor sharp, you need it to be able to shave, you need it to be able to fillet fine paper to do cutting. It's not like it's that difficult. It can be achieved off a 36 grit dressing stone if you just understand the process of sharpening, understand that there's multiple bevels on a knife, and that when you're grinding, you're trying to achieve different things. When you're grinding the main blade bevel on a knife, which again most people don't do, but when you're grinding this, all you're trying to do is thin out the edge. So you want a very, very coarse stone and apply a lot of force. When you're grinding the edge bevel, all you're trying to do ideally is bring it down and stop just before you form an apex. You don't want to overgrind to form a burr, because then you got that problem of now you got to get rid of the burr and the weakened metal and all that jazz. So for the edge bevel, a very soft, muddy stone is ideal, and then you stop just before you reach an apex, and that's relatively easy to do. People think it's complicated. It's not. I've demonstrated it on multiple videos. The easiest way to do it is you cut into a stone, it generates a flat on the edge, you can see the flat, you grind until you can't see the flat anymore, and now you're ready for your micro bevel. Your micro bevel is your apex bevel, and you put that on with your final passes. And if you've done the other steps correctly, you can see just how easy it is to put a micro bevel on with this, which is a 36 grit dressing stone. 36 grit. It's that coarse you can see the individual particles in it. You can get a shaving sharp edge off this that cuts paper. If you actually use a stone that's made to sharpen, this is the Norton Economy, one of the cheapest sharpening stones you can get, hence the name Economy. The edge is way sharper, obviously, than the 36 grit dressing stone. And again, still relatively low grit. That's like 120, 320 grit stone. One last point I wanted to make. I just want to give a brief blurb about this stone. It's a Suihiro Ryu. It's one of the coolest stones I've seen in a while. It's a dual stone. You can see there's two abrasives, one little thin strip and then one big strip on the bottom, big slab. This is the same grit or the same abrasive. The only difference is the bottom side, it has a much more porous structure. The top side is much more dense, much more close packed abrasive. So the top side actually works as splash and go. The bottom side you need to soak. Of course you soak the whole thing if you want to use the bottom side. It's not like you just soak the bottom. This is one of the most expensive water stones that you can buy without getting like the crazy 30,000 grit Shaptons. I'm not sure I'd recommend it for anything, but I bought it mainly as a curiosity because I was interested in working with pressures in terms of differences of stones, because I'm still trying to understand how porosity and bond strength affect stones, and I figured, hey, this is cool because it has the same abrasive with two different structures. So that's going to be cool to look at, which is the main reason that I got it. The only thing that I will say so far is that I'm really coming to like a 300 grit abrasive as part of my normal sharpening. General kitchen knives, when you get them from people who are not that into knives and just look at a knife like you look at a hammer or a fork or anything like that, tend to be beat up. Not just dull, but the edges are just smashed in because they bang around in the kitchen sink and scrape pots and that kind of stuff. And with a 300 grit abrasive like this, I can actually take the edge and restore it in as little as 10 to 20 passes per side, and then it's ready for a micro bevel. And you can see how fast I put a micro bevel on with a 36 grit stone. It's the same speed as if we actually use a more sensible abrasive. So 10 to 20 passes per side on this. I can have a really dull knife, have the edge ground, ready for the apex bevel, bang, put that on, 5 to 10 passes per side, which means in 30 to 60 seconds at most, I have a horrendously dull knife back to use. Really liking a 300 grit stone. Not sure the kind of advantages to having a dual density stone like this. Again, relatively expensive, but 300 grit stones I'm really starting to like for the cutting speed, and you can get a relatively decent finish off this. It's not going to take any big chunks out of the edge or anything at all like that, which can happen when you go down to the 100 grit stones and below. You can get clean edges off them as well. But you have to make a bit more careful in technique and skill. It doesn't take a lot with this, and this generates a relatively light slurry as well, and I've been playing around with this with chisels and that kind of stuff. And after about a month or so, I'll probably put up a video on this and some commentary, because I know enough about stones now to sort of get a handle on how to review them, I think, in a half sensible way. So I'm going to start talking a bit more about them now in the future.